Welcome again. This is Grasshopper for Rhino ABC. I'm in my PARAMS colored shirt and I'm going through every node that I regularly use. I thought I'd start with this little interesting thing called protein databases. There is a node within the param file that's pretty interesting about importing those. I'm going to end with it, but in a sense that I'm here, it'd be pretty interesting to show you that online, if you're ever looking for geometries or considering what you have to do, you can jump right in and download and pull these files for yourself and have full range of some pretty interesting stuff to think about what you could use data to actually build geometries. Just throwing that in there for fun. Once again, Wickerson Studios is here. We'd like you to subscribe, or I would like you to subscribe to it. I've started this series, Grasshopper for Rhino ABC, intro, Rhino setup in 5 minutes, and then getting right into the params. So we'll continue along with that. What I have here is definitely I've talked a little bit about it. I brought in all the params under geometry, primitives, inputs, and utilities. We're going to go through the input ones that I actually find interesting. Deactivated all those, and as I've gone through geometries and primitives, I've made them a nice color blue that they're done, and I'll put these on my GitHub repository file under M. Wickerson so you can have access to them. What I did was a pretty long demo over on these files, and I want to talk about the inputs and what's useful and what's worth using. A couple things I wanted to show is if you want to input something, the most common thing you're going to use is probably a number slider. My file's moving pretty slow, but I showed some examples of basically typing in something like if you typed in the digit this number slider, pulling it over, the most common used tools are the number sliders and the panels. That said, I then generated a series of number sliders. This number slider I generated by simply double-clicking and typing in the number 1, because that would then set this over here to 0 to 1 as an integer. If I do it again and double type and then set a certain amount of decimal places, say 2 decimal places, this would come up 0 to 1 as a rational number between 0 and 1 with 2 decimal places. This one I obviously did 1 decimal place. The next one I chose to just double click and hit an integer between 0 and 10, and it comes up with a range from 2 to 10. And you'll see that it pops on. If you choose between 10 and 100, you'll get a number range slider, and you can do this with floats and decimals or whatever you want to call it to get decimal places as well. I have a number slider here which I actually set, interestingly enough, I showed that you could set things by double clicking, typing in 0, 2, and then 5, 2 is a double dot, decimal place, 2 decimal places, and basically you've got a number slider that will range from 0 to 5.00. And the last one is a method that some people use. They'll type in something like 3 less than 45, which is less than 345. And if they type that in, you get a number range that actually sets immediately when you come into that middle number that you chose, say it was 55, and you get that number slider. That said, that's not enough with number sliders. You need to go in, you have to see that there's an animation tool, expression tools. You go into edit, and you'll realize that you have full control over the names, rational numbers, integers, even numbers, odd numbers, the amount of decimal places. You can scroll and change the numbers within the system. You can actually go in here and slide whatever value you want, and you can certainly double click that value and set it to whatever you want as long as it's within that range. You can also work negative and positive within here, and that comes in handy when you're trying to center domains around the center of the world axis. It's a lot of information. Let's continue. Going to Boolean Toggles. Obviously, Boolean Toggle is something that's set for true. You click it and double click it, you'll be moved over to false. A button tool is exactly that. It's always off until you hold it down, then it'll come on. There's control knobs that work the exact same as number sliders, but they have a different form that you might become accustomed to. And there's digital scrollers that you can use as well. I've got my bifocal tools up here so we actually can see what these things are named and we can keep going. I did want to show you that I think I showed you that you can pull in through shift we're going to go into color, but I also wanted to show you that you could take things that were connected. This will get a little complex, and you can hit shift and you can bring that in, and then you bring in 2 colors and they'll connect both. If not, when you plug in one, it overrides the other one and the other one gets deleted off of it. That said, as you bring it in, let's say I brought one in through shift, but I wanted to pull that one back off, I'd hold control, start at the beginning of that, see the red, and get rid of it. And another tool to do, which is interesting, is you can hit Control Shift and pull out all those wires and reconnect them to another one. This one, to show a color slider, it's obviously a color picker. It's giving me an RGB value. and I can slide those around, change the transparency, and change those numbers. There's also some interesting tools down here you should look at. To have an appreciation for that, I've got to pick a geometry. And so what I did was I chose my geometry. I'm going to click on here. You've got some pretty, draw any previous, don't draw any previous geometry. You got wireframe, you've got shaded, and then you've got select what I'm actually selecting. So there is your, I'm going to leave that off. You can see how it works. If I'm only selecting that, I'm only seeing that geometry, but I'm going to leave it off. And this color wheel is going to work the same as that material slider to affect it. I could use this one as the material to affect that geometry. As it overrides for a second, things are moving slow, like I said, and I can play around with the color on those forms. But what I'm going to do is bring in this material and show you on that piece of geometry that I've got the ability to bring in with this color wheel. Very interesting tool. I have a number slider that tells me how many colors I want to bring in and apply to this wheel. And as I right click to this color wheel, you can choose by chromatic, you can choose tetrachromatic, you can choose triad, tetrad, all these wonderful things that kind of adjust how this color wheel works. And then you can actually rotate, extend the brightness and saturation of it, luminosity of it as well. Pretty awesome color wheel to actually get into. But in choosing it, I'm not sure if my preview is working with all these files open. We'll have to see. I could show a nice example on going into display and using this preview tool. I've got a gradient which is set up a domain 0 to 1, and then as I move along that domain, you can see the colors read as I go across that domain. This one's running pretty fast, so let's just use this as our sample of geometry. Obviously, that piece of geometry. Playing through that, and if, like I said, if I click that, you'd see exactly the geometry I've selected. And clicking that, I can't see the geometry along with that slider. Unless I hit Shift and select two pieces of geometry, I should be able to do it. Let's see if that works. Let me go on here and see if I can select that, and see if I can actually make that color work. No, it's overriding to the geometry. So I have to leave that off and then play with it here. One thing to look at these is you can add colors into it by choosing here. It'll give you a color choice, and I'm not sure why it's not coming up. And you can also go in here and play with these. Oh boy, things are moving slow. You can see that I can play with that along to change the color, and I can also drag it off. And if I drag it off, I was having this work, but like I said, I've got a few bugs right now because I have so many things open. I should be able to drag that right off. There we go. And now we've got a different color that's being read out of here. And if we just wanted to see what that data was, we'd see we're playing a little more with this RGB value. And so there's a lot of color control on what you do. Another thing I want to do is jump over to this one here, which is the use of the graph mapper, which is a nice thing. When you bring it in, the graph mapper, it comes in with nothing. So as you bring in your graph mapper, you've got to go in and set your curve by right-clicking graph types. And you can go through sine and parabola and Bezier and everything, or conical, or whatever you want. I have this one set to a parabola. And so, in doing a domain and range of points, you don't have to worry about this interpolated curve which runs through these points, which are two ranges, x and y. But I can affect y by the graph mapper. I don't have to write a script or a function for that. I have a domain end at 20, so I can lengthen this and shorten this. And I have the number of steps that go through that, so I can make it less and more. And then I could have total effect over playing with that visually. The one thing I don't like about Graph Mapper is it doesn't save your Graph Mapper settings when you load and unload a file. So you've got to reset it again. So it's not really a great tool in my opinion. The thing I showed wrong last time was with the Graph Mapper was importing, and then I thought you could use a file. I must have accidentally inputted that myself on the last tutorial. I'm getting close to 10 minutes. So when I brought in primitives on the last file and brought in file path, I thought I could actually import that to it. I wasn't doing that. I actually imported directly into it, but it is a bitmap that's generated. So when you double click this, I believe when you double click this, you can go in and choose your file, whatever you have into your files, and you can also affect whether it's black and white, and this will come in handy when you start to use a bitmap to build geometries. We'll use that a lot later on. Graph mapper I'm going to take off. And then there's the protein database that you're actually able to import one of those files I began this tutorial with. And the tutorial was basically taking a look at not just this, but taking a look at this and going back to the protein databases and having fun with geometries and importing that. There's so many things you can do. I've got lots of tips when it comes to McMaster-Carr. files and working it with engineers and having all of your geometries brought in to begin with, because there's so much generation of 3D files out there in the world. I don't see there's any point in modeling anything anymore. There's the basic point of scripting and then having that affect many different things. That said, we're at 10-minute mark. I'm going to take this. I'm content with it. I am going to right-click, group, and go over here and color to a nice passive blue. And leave that, and then get ready for this last section, which is utilities and what we can do with these things. And I'll try and go through all the way to the Galapagos for optimization and gene pool, but some really fun group number sliders and things that I think maybe weren't built for what they're used for by a lot of people, but pretty interesting things. I'm going to go back here and get ready to go.